We're here at the legendary Rockfield Studios with the legendary Sean Genockey.
Hello.
Hello, Sean.
Hello.
So, tell us, how did you get into the music biz? What are you doing here?
I came in through sort of songwriting and production, like being in a band when I was younger.
Where did you grow up? You London?
I grew up in London.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was in a band in my early 20s that got signed to an American label.
Oh, right.
And we toured the States for 3 years and made a few records. And while the records were going on, I was, sort of paying attention to what was going on. Was already interested in the whole recording process. Yeah. So sat through that, and then the band stopped, and then I got back in touch with the producer who had done our second record.
Right.
And spent 10 months working with him.
Right.
And then
so you just said, "I'll come and make your tea for you," and
help me out? Yeah, and we just sort of worked through a few projects together, and then.
And who was that?
That was a guy called Paul Stacey.
Right.
And then after that,
he's a guitarist, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've worked with his brother, I think.
Yeah, Jeremy. Yeah. So off the back of that, I decided that, because I'd sort of produced the first record and co-produced the second one,
right,
sort of thing, and put all the demos together, and and decided that the sort of style of production that I want to cut a long story short, I sort of stopped the band thing and decided the sort of production that I wanted to get into was an engineering-based production where I wanted to be the engineer as well. It's part to do with the sounds and the way it's constructed, as opposed to a producer that sits back and just arranges and has engineers that work for him.
But were you a self-taught musician then? In the first
I
place?
was. Yeah. My father's a musician,
right.
a drummer. Right through the 70s was playing with. So I was in studios from like 4 or 5.
Oh, right. Who did he play with then? Drop some names.
Jerry Rafferty.
Yeah.
John Martin.
Right.
Ian Gillan.
Right.
Sort of like 70s rock bands.
Yeah.
I did 4 years as an engineer. Like no production. Wasn't interested in the production. So I spent nearly 3 of those with Dave Erringer.
Right.
A lot of.
And how did you get introduced to people like Dave Erringer? Was that through Paul Stacey, or was that?
No, that was through. That was through. He mixed our first record when I was in the band.
So you called him up and said.
Yeah, I was like, I said, is there any room for a potato? Just because I felt that if I wanted to achieve what I wanted to get out of records, I had to have that experience, and the only way to do that would be to not be involved in the production at all. Right. Because Dave, being a producer in his own right, wasn't like, he didn't need me to come in as another producer, so it was perfect. And we did 3 years together, and then we still work together a bit now. I still mix things for him, and etc. And I suppose off the back of that, it just made much more sense to the whole thing of like, if you're in the studio and you've got something in your head that you want to try and achieve, you have. Personally, I think it's nice to be able to know how to do it and how to achieve that. Yeah. So
and you fell into the role. You knew what was required of somebody being a recording engineer, presumably from your experience of being in the band and from your upbringing, and a little bit of it in at the deep end with the first 6 months were pretty ropey, but in a way that I think it's a great way to learn. But you knew what to say to people and how to.
And I knew roughly how it worked. It was just a case of a little bit more hands-on experience. I mean, it's kind of how I learned to play music. I was my father's generation. It was always like you go and you get up on stage. They'd be doing little. Because all of those sort of musicians have little blues bands that they play at. Yeah. And I was always there from a very young age, dragged up on stage, and you're just there, and it's like, right, it's your turn. And that was kind of like...
Fantastic.
The whole... wasn't like go and have lessons for 4 years. Right. So I suppose that whole attitude spilled into this, and then... so I spent 4 years doing that, and then got back into the production. It's grown from there, and now I have a mix engineer who's been with me for 4 years now.
And who's that?
He's called Edwards, and you know, he came in as sort of like an assistant at my place when I first took it on.
Yeah.
And has a fantastic pair of ears, you know. Right. So it's really great for me. I've been working on a record solidly, and then he comes in and we mix it together. And
so do you leave him alone for a bit? And
yeah. I kind of present a good monitor mix, you know, of how I think things should sort of relate to each other. And recently I've been bouncing a lot of things, so that if there's a keyboard part that's made up from 5 or 6 parts, and I make it into these sort of prefers it if it's decided, you know.
Yeah.
And then we work through it together after he's had some time with it to say this is where I'd like to take it, and then we work through all the stuff. And I do I think the last 3 years I've done all the mixing at mine. You know?
Right. So tell me about your studio then. How did that come about?
That came about. There was a little label called Fruit Pie Records that went through Universal.
Is that what's his name? Kumar.
No.
That's Fruit Pie Music, isn't it?
That's Fruit Pie Music. Yeah. So it's Fruit Pie Records. This was a Scottish guy called Graham Messon. He set this up through Universal. He was a huge music fan, you know, and he'd put this studio in, but he had all this land at the back of his house, and he'd put sort of a studio in at the back to develop the bands for the label.
Right.
And this was probably 5 years ago, and I went and mixed an album for him in there, he probably a year after we finished that record, he folded the business and was had enough of it, and got burnt a couple of times, and just could see the decline of the music industry, and was like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Right.
And so I just he approached me and said, are you interested in taking on the studio?
So is it somewhere near where you live then?
Yeah, it's 10 minutes drive, but away from the home, which is nice.
Right.
And 100% soundproof.
Right.
So you can have blaring amps all hours a day. I mean, Mike's been down there. It's a little leafy suburb. It's quite unusual.
So in South London?
Yeah, near Kingston, you know?
Yeah. Okay.
And I mean, I suppose I just saw budgets getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and the whole sort of ethic of having time to develop an artist and make a record as great as it can be was disappearing, and that wasn't what I got into it for. You know, I think, you know, some bands you can make an album in a day, you know, but it's either that or it's like a month to 6 weeks and longer, and it's like once you go over a few days, you just need that time, you know, and so all that sort of development was stopping, and it was like, right, you've got 2 weeks to make your record, and you get what you get. And I don't know, I just felt that whole thing was you know, not conducive to making great records.
Right.
And so it was ideal to have a space where, I mean, initially it was just for finishing guitars and vocals, and I'd always go and mix somewhere else. I used to mix up at Livingston a lot, and that's how I met Mike. That used to be my favourite little mix room. Did loads and loads of records there.
In Studio One there?
Yeah. No, it's a great board, and it worked really well. But again, you know, sometimes the budgets just wouldn't allow for it, or you're mixing 3 a day, and it's just like, and you're not happy with it, you know. So I invested quite a lot of money into my place to develop sort of the mixing side of it.
So what have you put in there? What have you got?
I put in a Tube Tech summing amp. I put in most of the thermionic stuff, some SSL stuff, some API stuff. Nearly all of it is on clicks, so it's like a blend of analog and digital, so you know,
easily recallable.
Really easy, it comes back, and it's all high-end sort of stuff. So it's not like I've got rid of all the 60s WEM desk and the weird valve distortion box that never ever sounds the same, you know, because that it started causing real problems. So everything's like on clicks, and
that's because people ask you to tweak mixes.
It's just normal. People just expect it. So it's. I mean, what we're fighting at the moment, because Ed's my engineer, has started doing a lot of mastering in house as well, because again, budgets were like going to cheap mastering houses and ruining the hard work. so he really is good at that as well. So, but what's happening now is that people aren't the whole process, it's like asking for tweaks of the mixes after the mastering sounds. It's just an ongoing. I think people have got so used to from having their set up on their laptop that they don't understand the concept of why can't you just press the thing and bring it back and change. So I've avoided a desk up until now. I'm still entertaining the idea of a desk if I can, something that it can sort of go into the workflow and not be like, oh, channel 5's not working anymore.
Yeah.
So it'd have to be something new.
Yeah.
Something really good like an AWS 900. It's
really we know a man who can deal So you've got a room for you can stick a drum kit in. You got a booth for somebody else to
for a
sing
loud guitar. No,
right.
I tend to do the vocals in the bigger room. I mean, like I said, usually what happens at mine is not drums.
Right.
I have the sort of bigger of the rooms. There's usually 2 guitar amps set up, but it's still functional as it's a listening space as well for the band, because my actual control area is quite small, and they're all sort of like standing there, and the listening spot's not huge, so the sweet spot isn't that big.
Right,
so I've got a big pair of party speakers with a sub on these big trench blocks in the live room.
I see.
But I can still have sort of 2 or 3 guitar amps and all the guitars, and there's a sofa for them to sit in their own controller.
Yeah.
So we can do tracking in there, and I do the vocals in there. And then I've got a booth down the side that is it's got this like mineral lining on it, so you can have a combo blasting in there.
Right.
And it doesn't go in the control room at all.
Yeah.
Or if a bass player wants to do an amp.
Yeah.
That's the one thing that we've had with carrying out into the leafy suburban cul-de-sac, upsetting all the neighbours. So we had to build a thing for the bass. So it's so it just means I can be sitting there. I can have vocals and 3 amps set up, and there's still a lot of space, and it's just this bag of pedals, and it can just roll like that, and because.
So you tend to have already done the drums elsewhere then.
This how we're doing this now. So
right. Okay. So who's the artist you're working with this week?
This is Baddies from Southend.
So once you've got the drums, you'll carry on and get stuck into a few overdubs while you're here.
Yeah, I mean we'll track all the stuff on live. So the guitars, bass, and the 2 guitars, bass and drums, and guide vocal will be going for keeps, and then we'll take it back to mine. And I think we've got 2 weeks of overdubs with the first weekend off.
Right.
So it's like 12 days.
Yeah.
And it'll then. We'll do vocals sort of like probably after each one is finished, and then I think mixing for 10 days after that. But again, with an option if one song's not working or we need to do something that's that's how it would have. It used to always be like that. When I first started this, you'd never make a record in 2 weeks.
No.
But I suppose what's a nice thing that's happened that's come off the back of this of the musical recession, whatever you want to call it, the fact that music's free now and that there are no budgets for up and coming. There's no development anymore at labels. Well, there's development, but it's like up there. It's not like the bands that are scrabbling around. That no matter how talented they are, there isn't budgets for them. But what's happened is, in my eyes, is that they have to have their stuff together because they don't have 3 months at Rockfield. They've got a week, and it's all really sort of productive because they have to be good. Like the Baddies have to be good live because they're making their living out of their live show. That's how they survive. That's how they don't work. They've got a 3-month tour when we finish this. It takes them right up to August, and they're playing 6 days a week. All through Europe, and they're getting paid well to do those gigs. So it's like. So when you got involved, did you get into fiddling around with the arrangements of the songs at all with them, or a little bit with Baddies? With Ico, it was. I was just saying the 2 projects that I'm doing at the moment. With Baddies, it's just suggesting things. They have their identity very strong, and it's not really about that. You don't need to do that with them. It's like
you're not making 7-inch
singles.
No, they're already 2 minutes 10. You know?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you know, it's little things like, shall we try making the bridge half the length? Do you think it should be this tempo? Let's drop the key. Your voice sounds on the edge there. Let's put it down a semitone. You know, just little and sonic things. You know, like let's try this snare drum and it's going to make it. Let's try hitting it in the middle instead of the rim. And,
yeah.
You know, let's.
I noticed you turned up with a pile of gear. That's presumably helpful little things.
I just tend to have a bunch of things that I don't bring loads and loads of stuff. No. You know, but it's like 3 or 4 guitar amps. They're bringing my guitars down because I can get them in the car. So there's like...
So there's a fair amount of stuff.
Yeah, it's 6 or 7 guitars that just... It's like each one will inspire them to do something. And then some pedals and I have 3 snare drums that cover... There's an old 800, Ludwig 800, which is like just very toneful. And then there's a Black Beauty, 6.5-inch Black Beauty that sounds like a tom, you know, it's just like... And then a new DW that's just really snappy and so it's like between those 3 snares, if we can't get it, then something's wrong. Time to go to the pub, you know.
Get a new drummer.
Then with Ico, there was heavy involvement with the arrangements, and they embraced that. You know, it was like some of them we would. One of my favourite tracks that's turned out is. The middle 8 was the chorus, and the bridge is now the chorus, but extended with a new section. And we routine that in the studio. You know? It's like I did pre-production with them, but didn't really spot it. And as soon as we started working up, it's like, can we just try this? You know, and left them with it for 4 or 5 hours, and then we put it down. You know, it's like it's and the post-production in that has been a lot of guitar suggestion, working very closely with the guitar player to try out new things, and because they were sort of like an acoustic band before. You know, the last record was very acoustic based, they're all big Smashing Pumpkins fans, and they wanted to bring this sort of rock element to it, but keep the melody and not make it too like, you know, just to be clever with the guitars. And so that was just a lot of sort of like, right, these 3 parts together are going to make one thing that sounds like a sort of a sort of super chord, you know. It's like it's not about. It's like just trying to keep it very melodic and within what the singer does, you know. Baddies, it's an energy and an atmosphere thing.
Right.
I did an album here with a guy called Adam Masterson about 3 months ago. Who's signed to 21st Artists, brilliant, sort of like a sort of Ray Davis meets, I don't know, like Iggy Pop.
Yeah.
It's like it's very British, but he's got a punk sort of attitude to his songs. He's like an acoustic player.
Yeah.
That was, and we didn't have that long. We had 4 or 5 days here, and we had to do 5 tracks because we'd done it all at mine, and we needed some of the songs needed to be a bigger sound. And he thrived off the atmosphere so much. He was writing songs left, right and centre, and he was just absolutely brought so much out of the project, just having the time here. And that's why I will still always go and do the tracking at the residential places, and you know, you don't have to worry about whether blah blah's drunk too much wine and still in bed, and you're like, if you're in a studio where you're paying a lot of money, you know, those 3 hours where someone's late in the morning, it's going to be like, and everyone's, it has a domino effect on the whole thing, you know. And I think, you know, I don't want to cut corners on the spine of the tracks, you know, and you know, I mean, I have a fantastic reverb unit that can make my drum sound pretty big, but it does not sound like that. You know, 6 months' time, Baddies they'll be all over them like a rash, because it's already set up in Europe, you know. But they're kind of like, well, we'll just take our time with this. They've raised the funds themselves to make the record. Ico did the same, Adam did the same. You know, a lot of bands are doing that. It's like, well, why tie ourselves into something? We're going to have someone there trying to tell us how to do it, and a lot of those very experienced A&R guys are not working in those walks anymore. It's hard. It's really hard, but exciting time for young bands because, like I said, their live show has to be good again. And there seems to be a trend where there's a lot less Pro Tools tomfoolery going on.
Well, this was going to be my next question. So, having got the drums down, do you ever Beat Detective Elastic Audio, or just go for the great takes?
Totally depends on the band, you know. I mean, I embrace all of the technologies. I will never do it a way because I have a method. And I've worked with bands that they made us do it to a click, and they made us just like, they made you. It's like, if the song needs that, then we'll do it to a click, and if it needs the kick drum to be smack on, then we'll do it, you know. But I find that if this is the place where you iron out all the creases, you know, and you get the record the other side of the mix, and if you've ironed out every crease, you have that little lucid moment where you listen to it with friends, a couple of glasses of wine, and it just sounds shit, you know. It's just like a big smooth thing with no. I think people who enjoy music's punters, for want of a better word, you know, people who buy, music fans, people who aren't involved in this thing, they don't give a monkey's ass whether it's the kick drum is smack on zero or whether everything is perfect. Sometimes it needs to be, and they may enjoy that, but that's, you know, I think what they pick up on is the spirit and the emotion of the song, and what that's the thing that gives them the feeling, whether they like it or not. And that it doesn't you know, the sort of like the timing of the drum. Sometimes if everything is smack on, will be sterile.
Presumably that's a decision you've got to make as soon as you kind of got your master drum track, isn't it, really? So, and at that point, before you do any overdubs,
you have to know how you're going to approach the song before.
So you send them off to play table tennis if you're going to get stuck.
If I'm going to do that, then it's off you go. Yeah. I mean, there's some like this whole thing where I had a drummer play me some CDs the other day, and he was like, you know, I really like this drum sound. It was like a very sort of early Cure sort of thing with sounded like a Linn drum with a sort of hand clap underneath. Right. And I was like, well, we can do that, you know, but we'll have to do it like this. And I just sort of did the first 16 bars. I went in my samples folder and pulled the Linn drum and the finger snaps and just plopped it through. Yeah. Did the first 8 bars. It's like you could see he was like, oh, he said, but I thought when you did samples, like it had to be quantized, and I was just like, no, you know. So it's like, and I did another thing with a band, an Australian band signed to Sony called Ghostwood a few months back, and they wanted to do it to a loop. Right. So the first thing we did was made the loop. Yeah. And the band, they were all like 19, they were all excited, and they were all like off like trains, you know, the whole thing, the loop's like all over the place. And so what I did was and we got a good take, we got a really good live take. So what I did was then I moved the loop to the drums. Now that's sort of like, it's like the opposite of Beat Detective, but at the same time it's the same process, and it's the same kind of cheating, whatever you want to call it, you know. It's like embracing the technology to you know, like getting like the bass player, you know, has done his parts, and you're sitting there and you're thinking, God, that root note needs to be a semitone down there. It's like, why not, you know, you want to get the bass player to play his whole thing again, you know, just pitch it down, you know.
So what was the technology used to match the loop to the drummer? How did you do that?
My fingers. I just went through and
just chopped it all up.
Tabbed to transient the whole loop, cut it all up, and then just
shunted them around.
Yeah, just sat there with like with a nudge of, you know, 50 samples or something, and just it took maybe 45 minutes, an hour. Yeah. A bit of afterwards, you know. That's the only thing with this Pro Tools and malarkey, you know. It's need like sort of like a Bluetooth sort of pad, you know, or like think the edits, you know.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's the old RSI stuff.
There's a little bit of that going on, yeah. I mean, I love the fact that you can treat Pro Tools like a glorified tape machine, or you can be beyond intricate, and I embrace all aspects of it, and I don't think, you know, some people say, well, I always beat set in my drums it's always on, I always do it to 88%, and it's always like, it's just like, well, you know. Like, yeah, record the drums with no cymbals, but do it for a reason. Don't do it because you think it's some sort of cool modern technique that you're going to apply to all your records.
So, one other thing I'm really interested in, as a guitarist, I know you're obviously an accomplished guitarist, have you embraced amp plugins at all? Do you ever use
a little bit?
Amp Farm or
I find Amp Farm a little bit... I mean, it's really good. I like it. It's great on strings. I think Amp Farm is really brilliant on strings. Or if you've got the singers like, I want to go and do this wailing and scream this thing, and you haven't got time to plug all the amp in. It's like great for that. But I find if you're trying to do guitars or bass, it's particularly, is that there's something to do with the way that software is designed, and Reason is the same. They're fantastic tools, you know. But I find that if I'm using it on lots more than one instance, or if you're trying to get variations, it's like you can sort of just hear the same thing. It's like oh, the Marshall stack sort of sounds like the Fender, and it sort of sounds like. Whereas I find the Sans amp doesn't do that, and a lot of the new Pro Tools keyboards, the instrument things that they've just brought out, I think are fantastic, because they're like, you can program it, you can get into the thing, and it's got some sort of convolution thing going on where if you drive the unit it does something different. It's not all like linear, like if you move the VCO on this thing it's just going to sound like a slightly different version of that other sound. And I don't know about you guys, but I think Amp Farm is a little bit... Like pod is that. You get a pod and you flick.
There's all the new ones. There's DigiDesign 11, isn't it? If you ever use that one.
That's pretty good. Yeah. That seems alright. Yeah.
You know, there's hundreds of them.
I'd much rather have a guitar amp or a DI. I mean, I use a lot of.
I was going to say, do you do any reamping if you're mixing stuff?
Well, quite a bit of reamping. I mean, I used to always do my guitars like that. I always used to like, when the whole sort of budget thing went, and it's like, right, we've got 5 days, right, we'll reamp the guitars, we'll just put Guy guitar sounds up and go back to mine, we'll get all the gear out and the pedals and whoa. I also found the whole 2 lots of conversion thing, it was always not, I mean, you know, a reamp is an amazing tool, I use it all the time, and it's really brilliant for like goosing the bass up a bit and having a parallel of a guitar pedal with it just doing something really great and hitting it at the right impedance, and you know it works really well for that. But in terms of like rescuing guitar tracks, recently I've had a bit of trouble with that. You know, I've not enjoyed it. I've not been sitting there going, yes, this is a great process. I found a couple of techniques that and bring in my own guitar amps that I know well, and you know, the guitar players, a Les Paul fan, I've got a couple of Gibson style guitars that maybe like take him out of his box a bit, and it'd be like, try this, and he's really excited about his new guitar sound, and you know, then you kind of only need a mic in front of the amp.
And how do you cope with all the multiple roles? You know, if you've got your guitar amps, you're going to be running out there twiddling the knobs to get the sound, and then you've got to run back in here and EQ it a bit, or well, and then you've got to tell them what to play.
Come into good studios where the rooms sound good, and I suppose it's just knowing the gear. Like I know that if
do you get an assistant here these days? Do they?
Yeah.
So you get somebody.
Get someone to.
You can send them to twiddle the knobs.
Yeah. Well, I find if I sit with a guitar player for 10 minutes and I say, right, well, you know, I have a bag of pedals that I know what each one does, and I know what it does with that guitar, and I know what it does with that amp.
Right.
And I've got a set of really good leads that I know if we plug these 3 things in. You know, the guy's got to be a half decent guitar player to start with. It all kind of boils down to that, because I've got, you know, 3 or 4 setups that, you know, the Les Paul Special with that old Tube Screamer, with the Copycat, with that amp will sound good. You know, if you want that sort of thing.
Yeah.
If you want it to be a huge metal sound, you know, it will have to be that amp. If you want it to be, you know, it's not like. And I've gone back to the 1 amp thing again. You know, I used to do multiple amps, and I've gone back to like, this track needs this, so let's use that amp. But what I'll do is, tomorrow will be a setup day, and I try and make this very clear to the band that day 1 is so boring that, I mean, ideally in a utopian world I would have their roadie come down with the gear. He knows exactly how the drum kits get set up, and they come that evening to do the headphones, and it's like, it's all sort of half done. That's what I do. I worked with a band called Reuben last year, and Jamie, who's one of the most talented musicians I've ever worked with, is fiercely impatient. And what I used to do with them was get them to come at about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and I'd get the drummer to come who didn't give a monkey, so he'd set his kit up exactly as he wanted. And then I'd get the other 2 guys to come when everything, not just like, it's in place, it's like you pick the headphones up and you can sing and you can play guitar and it's all, and he would thrive on it, he'd come in, do his thing, let's go, let's get out of here, I hate it here, because that's kind of like, that's, and a band like Reuben, again, with the arrangements, they were so clear with what they wanted to do. It's your role as a producer then is to create the environment that brings out the best in them. A secret.
Something you do that you've never seen anybody else do, or something you learned from somebody that is unusual and unique.
There's lots of little things like that.
Great. Far away. Tell us all your secrets.
All my secrets. Well, I think...
mic positioning things, or
mic positioning things. I recently, say if this is the cone like this, is to start with it on the edge here, pointing right at the cone, and then if you want it brighter, it's just to move it around like this. This is one mic, and the white noising trick, do you, with the guitar mics? That's something Nick Terry showed me. Dave Erringer pioneers as well. Is that if you've got this mic here, here's the cone, like you get it there and you're like, I think I quite like where that sounds. You can send white noise to the amp and listen to the noise of the first mic. If you set the gain structure to the 2 mics identical on the board, and then in the headphones introduce the second microphone and push it in until the noise goes big,
Right.
And another way of doing it is hitting the phase on the second mic and pushing it in until the noise disappears.
Yeah.
That's a way. it's a way of doing a guitar sound.
So it's all about your phase coherence.
Yeah, your phase coherence. Something I've been doing lots and lots of is taking usually the closer room mics on the drums and popping the old time adjuster on, which it's not much of a trick, but that is
to bring them into.
I just push them out, push them away. I tend to push them away,
delay them more.
Yeah, so then there's always like a little sweet spot for those.
Right.
Bass players, trying to convince them that you don't always have to use a bass amp.
Well, I know that. Yeah.
It's like a Sans amp and a good DI. It goes a long way.
Yeah. Do you use the Sans amp box?
I got the little classic pedal and the bass driver as well. Yeah. So I've been doing a lot of recently with when a singer wants the chorus to sound big, is using one of the other takes and putting the double track to a delay. And it doesn't sound double tracked, but it sounds huge,
Right.
Because a lot of singers don't like their voices double tracked.
Oh, I see. So you send the double track.
So you send the double track just
pre-fade to a delay, or something.
Just to a delay or to a reverb. So it's just there's always this.
So you get the effect of that rather than the main
You get
one.
the sort of smudge of the two things.